please hit that like button, the subscribe button, and be sure to hit the bell for notifications. Welcome back. Tonight we have some special stuff for you. We got 3 sightings of the infamous Dogman, and I'm being joined tonight by AsTheRavenDreams. He'll be reading one of the stories for you. Are you ready, people? Let's jump on in. This happened to me back in 2012 when I was only 17. I had been staying over at a friend's house, just dinking around and hanging out, and I remember it was getting late. I told my friend then it's probably better that I start to head home, and so I left his place. It was a school night, so I realized I probably should be home at somewhat of a decent time. Now my friend lived in an apartment complex about a mile or so away from where I lived. The road that I used to walk back to my house is pretty lone and desolate. There's acres and acres of woods along this road due to the plot of land being never developed. I walked on this road quite often to go to my friends' houses, to walk around. I've never had any issues except for this night. As I'm leaving my friend's apartment complex, I begin to get a strange feeling like I'm being watched. My first instinct is that there's a gangbanger or someone who's going to shank me, so I start to pick up my pace quite rapidly. As I'm walking down this long stretch of road, next to me across the street is that forested plot of land I was telling you about. It was quite a big plot of land too. I think several acres of just undeveloped land. Since it was undeveloped, the brush was extremely thick and there was a lot of trees. The only things that I knew that probably went into there was critters or homeless people. I began to hear shuffling and thudding in the woods, keeping parallel with me on the street as I kept my pace. My instincts fired up and I thought it was a person, but then as I began to listen closer and closer, I realized the footsteps were extremely heavy. This person would have to weigh hundreds and hundreds of pounds for it to make any sense. I began to get so scared, but I knew if I looked over I would see something I didn't want to see, and so I kept my gaze straight and continued on down the street. Keep in mind it's after 10 p.m. At this point, there's really no cars around and the only light is the street lights. I make it a little further down the street, and for whatever reason, decide to look over, and looking at me through the trees was the ugliest looking wolf creature thing I've ever seen in my life. It was hideous. All I can remember seeing is bright glowing red eyes and huge sharp teeth. What scared me the most is it acted like it wanted to see me and wanted to scare me. It wasn't just checking me out. I feel like it was trying to lure me into the woods, but I just kept walking. There's a part where you get to, and then straight where you can take a road that goes to your left, away from the forest, but it adds about an extra mile or so to get back to my house. I wasn't taking any chances this night. I booked it down that road, and I looked behind me to see if this thing would follow suit, and it didn't. I ended up getting back home about 30 or so minutes later, since I took the extra long way, but looking back, I don't regret it, and I don't know what was watching me in that forest. I told a couple of my friends and they believe it was a werewolf. I didn't think werewolves were real, but that's the only way I know how to describe what I saw other than it being some sort of wolf creature. This thing was tall though. It was staring at me higher in the tree line. There's no way that was just a regular dog unless it was given some sort of crazy serum to grow 10 times the normal size. And why would a dog have glowing red eyes and be staring at me and showing its teeth? I still get goosebumps thinking about it. This sighting happened around fall of 2017. I was driving back to Vermont with my parents in the back seat, and we were checking out the beautiful scenic view near Lake Champlain in New York. It was about 1 in the afternoon and we were driving down Highway 9, which rides right along the lake, and it also drives right by the Osable Marsh Wildlife Area. This marsh area is rather small, but it's still beautiful to look at. If you're driving the 9, it's a pretty forest with a lot of brush on both sides, with there being a little bit more openness on the western side. More open being more spread out trees, and you can see. Now, like I said, my family and I were driving up this highway headed north. That's when my father in the back seat happened to look over to his left and saw these huge dogs running to the woods. He said, "What on the earth is that?" And we all looked over, and there was 4 of them at least that we could see. They were actually going faster than we were. Then all 4 of them bolted out onto the road and crossed it. They looked like huge brown and gray wolves. I've never seen a dire wolf before in my life, but I would imagine if they did exist, this is what they would look like. It was definitely a pack, and after they bolted across the road, my parents were both freaking out, saying, "Oh my God, did you see that? I've never seen those kinds of dogs before." They didn't look too strange to me, but I really didn't get a chance to sit there and stare at them and really take in all the details. In my mind, I'm driving, so what I did see was just 4 or 5 giant wolves running to the woods and then cross the highway quickly. At no time do they bother to look over at any of the cars, or us, and just kept to their own. I didn't see any teeth, and I didn't see any eye glow or any of that. I don't think it was a dogman since they were running on all 4s, but I definitely believe they were dire wolves or something, because they were huge. Imagine wolves the size of a moose, and you kind of get the picture. Not only us, but a couple cars in the oncoming lane slammed on their brakes as these beasts ran out. We know a few other people saw them as well. I know there's wildlife out here, but I never knew those existed.
I'm 20 years old now, and my encounter happened when I was 6 years old, turning 7. Back then, my family and I lived in a country stead in Londrina, Paraná, Brazil. It wasn't a rural property, it was more like a country summer house, but in the city. The property was just outside the suburbs, in the northwestern part of the city, edging the city limits and nearing the country. It was an approximately 420 square meters, 502 square yard piece of land, surrounded by 2-meter or 6.5-foot tall walls for more privacy. The house sat in a far corner of the property with a good view of the surroundings, 90 to 95% view of the whole property from the front porch of the house. The region, northern Paraná, where the city lies, resembles southern Missouri or northeastern Kansas, but it's tropical rather than temperate subtropical. The city is a metropolitan area with a population of 486,000 plus people. It would resemble Wichita, Kansas, or Kansas City, Missouri. The landscape is fairly flat with some hills. The scenery has little vegetation with only some parks and nature preserves. None big enough to have a decent population of any medium or large animal species whatsoever. There are no bears in Brazil, and the largest predators found in the wild are the maned wolf, the southern South American cougar, and the Pantanal jaguar, none of which really could be identified as what I saw. My encounter was brief, but it was clear enough for me to make out the shape of the creature, its color, size, etc. So, on to the encounter. It was Friday, October 8th of 2002. It was mid-spring in the South Hemisphere, and that night there was a full moon with relatively cloudy skies. We had a dozen dogs on the property, which all slept together in a large kennel on the side of the house. They would be pretty quiet at night, but on that night they were unsettled and spooked. One of the dogs managed to escape from the kennel and was desperately trying to get into the house. I was alone with my mom, and she asked me to turn on the floodlights outside the house and check out what all the commotion was about. I did that and went to the front porch to scan the area, trying to see what could have scared the dogs. I'm staring at the corner where we had a mango tree, 90 to 120 meters or 98 to 130 yards away, and I saw this large, grayish creature running on all fours, avoiding the light. It passed behind the mango tree and disappeared into the dark. As I saw it, I immediately identified it as being a werewolf, like from that movie Bad Moon, but with a slightly larger head, thicker snout, and bulkier build. On its hind legs, it must have stood at the very least as tall as the property walls, which again was 2 meters or 6.5 feet. I stand 1.74 meters or 5'7", by the way. I froze for a few seconds after seeing it. It was a brief sighting, and it only lasted for 2 to 3 seconds. And as soon as I recovered from the shock, I sprinted as fast as I could back into the house, locked all of the doors, and closed the windows that were still open. I was familiarized with werewolf movies back then, and I was already aware of the impossibility of there being someone who could shapeshift into a monster. But what I saw was unmistakably similar to a werewolf. So, since that encounter, I started to believe in werewolves, only under the same concept of dogmen, which are natural rather than supernatural and look the way they do 24/7, a term which I only came across recently. And that is the encounter that I had with a dogman. Just like in the US, where there are places where sightings are frequent, there are places in Brazil where they happen frequently too. In the US, it would be Elkhorn, Wisconsin, Taylor, Mississippi, and Marshall, Texas. In Brazil, it would be Juanápolis and Trelagos. Juanápolis has had sightings of werewolves and dogmens ever since its foundation. Its first mayor was said to be a werewolf back in the mid to late 1800s. The town is filled with werewolf references. Trelagos has had many sightings ever since the late 1980s and early 1990s. There was a series of nights in this small city in the 1990s where people claimed that a werewolf was roaming the streets at night, after dark, trying to invade houses, climbing on roofs and howling all night long, scaring people's dogs, and attacking livestock. It really scared people. The state police began reinforcing night patrols and started investigating, assuming that someone was out at night in a suit, scaring people. Some cryptozoologists even collected DNA samples. As it turned out, it wasn't human DNA, or that of any known animal, and it certainly was not artificial hair from a suit.